Tell them I fought to the end, but don't let them see me weak. Those chilling last words, whispered behind closed doors, were never meant for the cameras. At Robert Redford's final farewell, a truth emerged, one he had hidden his entire life. Dramatic setup, 180 words. The funeral was not the Hollywood spectacle many expected. No flashing bulbs, no grand ceremony. Instead, Robert Redford's final goodbye unfolded quietly in the shadow of the Utah mountains he once called his sanctuary. But even here, whispers followed him. Some mourners claimed they saw it in his last public appearance, a frail step, a trembling hand he tried to disguise. Others remembered the way his voice cracked during his final Sundance speech, as if he already knew it would be his last. Inside the family circle, there was tension. Years of unspoken regret, lost time, and hidden grief seemed to echo louder than the prayers. His children stood close, their faces carved with both love and sorrow. His wife whispered through tears, clinging to his final promise, "I'll never leave these mountains." And yet, beneath the silence of that funeral service, one haunting question lingered: what really happened to Robert Redford in his last days? Backstory and decline, 240 words. Robert Redford had always been more than a movie star. He was the Sundance Kid, the golden face of a generation, the man who built not just films, but a movement. To fans, he was eternal. To Hollywood, he was untouchable. But the story behind the legend was far darker. As a child, he battled polio, an illness he rarely spoke of. In 1959, tragedy struck when he and his first wife lost their infant son, Scott. Redford carried that wound in silence for decades. The grief never left him. In the years that followed, he built an empire of films, activism, and Sundance. Yet, every triumph carried shadows, rumors of broken friendships, the crushing pressure of Hollywood politics, and a personal life scarred by distance and regret. By the 2010s, time began to reveal its grip. Open heart surgery in 2015 left him weakened. Though he smiled for cameras, the man who once skied the Utah slopes now moved cautiously, his body betraying the vitality his roles had promised. In 2018, he shocked the world with a calm announcement: "I'm retiring." To his fans, it was career closure. But to those closest to him, it was something else, an unspoken admission that his body was failing, and his fight against time was nearly lost. Family and relationship arc, 240 words. Behind the legend was a father, a husband, and a man marked by devastating loss. The death of his first son, Scott, shattered him. Friends said he rarely spoke of it aloud, but the grief carved itself into his soul. Decades later, another tragedy struck when his son James, himself a filmmaker and activist, lost his battle with liver cancer in 2020. At 58, James's death left Robert in unimaginable pain. "It's every father's worst nightmare," a close family friend recalled, and it happened to him twice. Redford leaned heavily on his second wife, painter Sybil Shoggers, whom he married in 2009. She became his anchor in those final years, the one who kept him grounded as illness and grief consumed him. His surviving children, Shauna, Amy, and Dylan, remained close. But behind the smiles at family gatherings, there was an unspoken weight. Redford often admitted regret, that his relentless career had cost him time with them. That success had sometimes come at the price of presence. In his last months, family conversations carried both love and sorrow. Imagined words haunted those who were there. "Did I give you enough? Did I show you how much you meant?" For them, the greatest pain was not just losing Robert, but knowing he left carrying that regret. Final goodbye, 180 words. Robert Redford's last days were spent in his beloved Utah home, surrounded by mountains and silence. He refused hospital beds and flashing monitors. He wanted dignity. He wanted control. But his body had other plans. Friends described how, in his final weeks, he grew frail, his once powerful frame reduced to fragility. He moved less, spoke softly, but his mind remained sharp. He often sat by the window, gazing at the snow falling over Sundance, whispering to his wife, "This is where I belong." His last public appearance, at Sundance, was haunting. Fans cheered, but insiders noticed the struggle in his steps, the way he paused mid-sentence, as if catching his breath from more than just words. It was his silent farewell, masked in applause. On his final night, surrounded by family, he whispered one last request: "Tell them I fought. Tell them I never gave in, but don't let them see me weak." And then, the golden boy of Hollywood slipped away, not on a stage, but in the quiet of his sanctuary. Legacy and closure. 190 words. News of Robert Redford's passing shook the world. To fans, he was the eternal cowboy, the rebel, the visionary. Obituaries painted him as the last great Hollywood icon. But behind the headlines, his legacy carried something deeper. He was the father who endured unbearable loss, yet still built a family bound by love. He was the activist who gave a voice to filmmakers ignored by the studio system. He was the man who turned a mountain retreat into Sundance, the heartbeat of independent cinema. For filmmakers, his legacy was hope. Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, countless directors all owed their first break to him. For audiences, his films were timeless. For his family, his life was both gift and grief. Even in death, Robert Redford left a haunting reminder that no legend is immortal, and no life is without pain. Yet, within that fragility, lies something universal. We are all stories. We are all love and regret, triumph and loss. And like Redford, we are remembered not only for what we achieved, but for how deeply we lived. That is Robert Redford's final gift. His legacy is not the myth, it is the man. When news of Robert Redford's passing spread across the world, it was as if a piece of Hollywood itself had gone quiet. Headlines called him the last great icon of a vanished era. Social media erupted in tributes, with fans young and old sharing images of Butch Cassidy, The Sting, and The Way We Were. But what struck most people was not only the grief, it was the gratitude. Gratitude that they had witnessed a man who carried both rugged strength and quiet vulnerability on screen. Gratitude that he had given independent storytellers a home when no one else would. Gratitude that, even in silence, he had remained true to himself. One fan wrote, "We never saw him as weak. We saw him as human. That's what made him eternal." In Hollywood, tributes poured in from every corner. Directors remembered him not just as a star, but as a mentor. Quentin Tarantino recalled that without Sundance, his breakthrough may never have happened. Jane Fonda, his longtime co-star, said simply, "He was the most beautiful man I ever knew inside and out." Younger actors spoke of his kindness. They described how, even when he was decades older, he treated them as equals, not as apprentices. In a world where fame often creates distance, Robert Redford built bridges. At the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, a memorial was held. Clips of his films played on the screen: his smile in The Great Gatsby, his defiance in All the President's Men, his charm in Out of Africa. But when the lights came back on, the room was silent. The audience wasn't just mourning an actor, they were mourning a storyteller, a leader, a friend. Back in Utah, the Sundance Institute hosted its own tribute. Snow fell gently on the mountains as young filmmakers gathered at the festival he had built from nothing. Instead of a moment of silence, they held a night of screenings. Films that might never have existed without Redford's vision. A letter from his wife, Sybil, was read aloud. He always said these mountains would outlast him, but he hoped his love for stories, for truth, for art would live here forever. The crowd rose in applause, not in mourning, but in celebration. For them, Redford was still alive, living in every frame of every independent film that Sundance made possible. What Robert Redford gave to cinema was more than performances. He gave it a conscience. When he created Sundance, it wasn't for money or prestige. It was for outsiders, for storytellers who had something to say but nowhere to say it. In doing so, he changed the landscape of American cinema forever. Films once ignored by studios found audiences. Directors once overlooked became legends. And through it all, Redford never asked for credit. He walked the festival grounds like any other guest, nodding to strangers, encouraging nervous young directors, watching films with wide eyes as if he were still a student of the craft. He believed cinema was more than entertainment. It was a mirror, a weapon, a chance to change the way people see the world. That belief is his truest legacy. Yet, behind this towering achievement was still a man, a father who buried his sons, a husband who carried the burden of illness quietly, a human being who, in his last years, admitted to regrets. He once told a friend, "I chase stories, I chase the truth, but sometimes I forgot to chase the moments at home." Those words haunted him, but they also humanized him, because even as Robert Redford stood as a Hollywood giant, he remained fragile. His story wasn't just about triumph, it was about mistakes, heartbreak, and forgiveness. And perhaps that is why his legacy resonates so deeply. He was not a flawless hero. He was one of us. In the weeks after his passing, something remarkable happened. Young audiences, people who had never seen Butch Cassidy in theaters, who didn't grow up with the Sting, began discovering his work for the first time. Streaming numbers for his films soared. His final performance in The Old Man and the Gun became a trending title. For a man who once worried about being forgotten by new generations, this was his silent victory. His art had crossed the barrier of time. An 18-year-old fan wrote online, "I never knew Robert Redford until now, but watching him feels like watching someone I've always known." And maybe that was his gift. He didn't just play characters, he played truth. Robert Redford rarely spoke about death, but in his interviews, he often hinted at his philosophy of life. He believed in resilience. He believed in beauty. He believed in fighting for what mattered, even if the fight was uphill. One of his most quoted lines was not from a film, but from his own words. "The measure of a man in how he dies. It's how he lives, what he stands for, and what he leaves behind." By that measure, Redford lived a monumental life. As we reflect on Robert Redford's story, his triumphs, his tragedies, his silence, and his legacy, we're left with something bigger than Hollywood. Something that belongs to all of us. We see that even legends are fragile. Even icons carry regret. And yet, within that fragility is where the real strength lives. Robert Redford's life teaches us that no matter the fame, no matter the image, what endures is love. The love we give to our families, the love we show to our craft, the love we carry for truth, even when it hurts. And so, the shocking truth behind Robert Redford's final days is not just about illness or decline. It's about something universal, that all of us, whether stars or strangers, leave behind a story. And it is up to us to decide how that story is told. In the end, Robert Redford was not just the Sundance Kid, not just the golden cowboy of Hollywood. He was a father who grieved, a husband who loved, a dreamer who built something that would outlast him. When the camera stopped rolling, when the crowds went home, when the legend faded into silence, what remained was simple: a man sitting by his window, watching snow fall on the mountains he loved, whispering, "This is where I belong." And maybe that is the lesson for us all, that in our final days, what matters is not the applause, not the headlines, not the myth. It is the love we gave, the lives we touched, and the courage to face the end with dignity. Robert Redford gave us that gift, not only on screen, but in life. And for that, he will never truly be gone, because legends die, but stories live forever.